Good evening, I'm Aaron Bone. This is Game Journalism Network. Joining me live online is QQ, host of Recap. QQ, say hello.
Hey, hello.
All right. We brought you in at a very interesting time because initially I wanted to just talk to you about Gamergate, critical distance, and current happenings. And yesterday's current happening was kind of a big deal. It got jumped a few times, especially with the end of Gamergate, everything with the Ralph retort and everything that's been going on. We'll talk about that later. First thing, though, I wanted to talk to you about more than anything was critical distance.
Sure.
You've been talking about a lot on Recap, and it hasn't been covered a lot online. In fact, we've been trying to write up about it ourselves. We just haven't finished it yet. We have a lot of things on our plate, unfortunately. We're moving into a new place in the studio to get everything situated for Game Journalism Network, so we're a little behind on that. But can you talk to us about critical distance?
Sure. So critical distance is they're an interesting kind of service because we know what a blogger is and we know what a journalist is, and sometimes the line between those is a little bit blurry, but generally we know what those are. What critical distance is, though, is they are a curator. So what they do is they go out every I think it's every week. Yeah, their main series is called This Week in Video Game Blogging. They go out every week. They find what they think is worth publishing in the blogosphere. They write a little editorial about what they think of each piece, try to fit them together within context. They say it's facilitating a dialogue. That's how they put it. Like they try to have point counterpoint and what they think of it and things like that. And then they'll write up this article and it will get published. First of all, it gets published on their website, obviously, but it will also end up in places like Gamasutra or the New Statesman. And it used to end up in the Escapist, but they no longer publish there. And that's an interesting story in and of itself. So that's what critical distance is they're a curation service that finds articles, writes their own little editorials about them, and then gathers them up into a big article and publishes them.
Now, this, of course, is a big deal in multiple circles, especially within Gamergate, because this has been a consumer revolt specifically about ethics in gaming journalism, and we've been seeing a lot of conflicts of interest, especially with critical distance, that have been underreported compared to other situations in Gamergate. Why is that, you think?
Well, this is just my subjective opinion on it based on trying to report on conflicts of interest for months now. I usually try to put at least one conflict of interest that's been found recently in each one of my recaps. They're really difficult to cover in a compelling way. Talking about a conflict of interest is really dry subject matter, and if you don't present it in a very compelling way, no one's really going to be interested in it. So I know it sounds strange, but conflicts of interest are just very difficult material to present.
Okay, and especially with everything that's been going on, because now we've been having people who are essentially calling out when there is a conflict of interest, and now there's been a lot of newer pushes in man, I lost my train of thought there for a second. I mean, there's been a lot of pushes in new editorial practices, especially with conflicts of interest, of trying to recruit themselves. But with something like critical distance, where it's a blog, it's not necessarily enforced, but it could still be an issue.
Yes. So it's especially interesting that they define themselves as being a curation service, because that is kind of something that's not really well defined as far as I could tell. Now, there are things like Steam curators where they write little reviews about games. Basically, anyone can sign up to be a Steam curator. And that does actually have a mini code of ethics that basically says if you accept money, you have to say in your curation of a game that you accepted money from the publisher of the game. So there is precedent for curation services having ethics policies. Also, they do get published in places like Gamasutra and the New Statesman. And all that it says in the article, it doesn't say like this is an opinion piece, this is a curation piece. It usually just says published in cooperation with critical distance. So it looks just like any other Gamasutra article, except for the little blurb at the top that says this was published in cooperation with critical distance. So there's potential there for the consumer to, I mean, it just looks like any other article. So a consumer is going to think it's an article in Gama Sutra.
And this has, of course, been a big deal, especially since we've been seeing a lot of people who are leaving a lot of these websites and starting their own thing. And one of the biggest fears has been, if they become some kind of authority figure in this matter, would there be more of a conflict as we've been seeing with Gamergate?
Well, that's always a concern, right? Once someone skirts the rules and gets away with it so long, and there is no, nothing happens, not even a slap on the wrist, are we going to see copycat behavior? Because if it's working for one group, it might work for another. Critical Distance, as far as how large they are, they're not very big, like financially. Like their Patreon is $1,850, but they are doing these things. They're publishing things in Gama Sutra, and they have influence. I mean, some of the Gamers Are Dead stuff that we're hearing right now, they were talking about that for quite a while now. So it's something that needs to be talked about. We need to discuss what kind of standards we expect from such a curation service. And now's the time to have that discussion while there's not very many of them and while they're small.
Now, going back to with Patreon and everything of this nature, and this has actually been a big debate as well with Gamergate as a whole, has been money within the industry in different ways, like how people are getting funded in different factors, especially journalists funding a game in some, a game developer or a game in some kind of way. Patreon, of course, is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Patreon is, of course, you're giving money every month to support that artist or support that team in developing something. But when we have something like Kickstarter, you're essentially paying for a product to be developed. Now, a lot of people have been using this argument that putting money into a Kickstarter in a way to pre-order a product or a game, is that still considered a conflict of interest in some way, shape, or form? In your opinion, is that what, do you think that that's a possibility?
I think that it could be possibly considered a conflict of interest if the amount that is put in exceeds the amount to acquire a product. It's a blurry line though, and different publications within their ethics policies define what constitutes a conflict of interest with regards to crowdfunding in slightly different ways. So it's subjective.
Okay, and back to Critical Distance from one last time. Personally, what would you like to see Critical Distance do different from what you've been seeing and everything that's been going on with Critical Distance? What would you prefer to see differently? So
what I really see is the issue is not necessarily the usual one, which is what you see when a journalist pays money into a Kickstarter or a Patreon, and then they cover the product that is produced from it. The financial transaction in Critical Distance's case is usually happening in the other direction, where an article or sometimes even a game that they are discussing, and in the case of an article, they are linking to the blog. That article that they're linking to is occasionally from someone who is donating to them on a monthly basis. That's a more cut and dry conflict of interest. If someone is paying you money and you are writing about them, that's hard to justify. So in that case, there's really two courses of action that you can take. If you're a curation service, you always have the option of choosing what you do and do not curate. So there is a very easy option of recusal. Just don't cover people who are paying you money. It solves the problem simply. Of course, the other option, which is a lesser option, is disclosure. Again, I tend to, this is my personal opinion, I think that a lot of people participating in GGE tend to settle for the idea of disclosure. I am not sure that disclosure is always appropriate. In this case, though, the amounts of money are generally small. A disclosure might be sufficient in order to make the consumer aware that when they're clicking on that link, they're clicking to a link to a financial supporter of Critical Distance.
Okay, and that's actually that's fair enough in multiple ways. I mean, since they are a blogging service, they're not holding themselves to the standards as a journalist. Whereas a journalist, there are different rules, obviously, and obviously, when it comes to a conflict of interest, they are very different.
Yeah, it's a blurry line because they are a blog. They're published in places like the New Statesman and Gama Sutra, but they are this curation service thing, and they have their own website. So, does it become an issue where on their own website they don't need to make these disclosures, and yet when it's published in Gama Sutra they do? That's a blurry line. That's something that needs to be discussed. And like I said, it's a good time to have that discussion because right now there's not very many of these article curation services that I know about. And the one that I do know about that exists that keeps having these issues with disclosure and conflicts of interest is quite small.
Sorry, one. Very sorry. Cough drop wearing off. But you did bring up a good point. All right, let's go back to the beginning real quick with Gamergate. What got you involved in Gamergate specifically? What was the first thing that you noticed, and what made you want to start doing a weekly show like Recap?
So, in the terms of image board culture, this is going to out me as a plebeter, but I was on Reddit once, and I was browsing around the front page, and I started to notice the anomalies that a lot of people had noticed at Reddit at the time. I saw the Total Biscuit post where Total Biscuit was talking about the state of the game industry, and every single comment, like 20,000 comments, were just completely wiped out, which looked really strange. And then there was the issue of Internet Aristocrat's videos. I'd never seen anything from Internet Aristocrat before. But his videos kept popping up on Reddit, and I think they got deleted a few times, if I recall. But finally, they found a subreddit that they would stick to. And of course, since there were censorship attempts to suppress the videos, everyone was upvoting that Streisand effect. So I was watching those videos. He was a compelling speaker, and that was kind of what got me to start paying attention to it. Of course, Gamergate didn't exist at that point in time. That was still for a little while later, before Adam Baldwin would first use the hashtag. So I guess you could say that I've been here since before the hashtag existed. So that's when I first started taking interest. And anytime I see censorship, that is like something that I want to work around. I want to, if there's something that I'm being told that I can't talk about, I'm going to find a way to talk about it. And that's how I landed on places like Kotaku in Action and 8chan.
Okay. And do you, starting Recap and everything you've been doing, there seems to be a very... there seems to be a Daily Show-esque vibe to what you're doing. Do you consider yourself a faux journalist, a blogger? What do you consider yourself as when it comes to doing something like Recap?
I would say a blogger would be a fair description. I actually hold myself to as high of a standard as I try and hold everyone else to. I try to make sure that I disclose any possible financial conflicts of interest, friendships, anything like that, even minor things like when I was on a stream with Game Diviner after Airplay. When I covered Airplay, I said, hey, I was chatting it up with Game Diviner on a stream a few days ago. I try to be very thorough in my disclosures because I don't want to look hypocritical. And, well, if ethics are important to me when other people are involved, they should be important to me when I'm involved as well.
And okay, so starting Recap, what was one of the things you wanted to? What was your specific goal when you wanted to start doing a show like Recap? Aside from pointing out the financial issues and things of that nature, was it just specifically covering Gamergate, or do you want to do something more in the long run when it comes to something like Recap?
I had very small aspirations. Basically, what happened is there used to be this streamer and YouTuber named Socks. She's still around. She used to make a recap series as well, and she stopped doing it after a while. And I noticed this void in my life. I was like, I used to watch these videos by Socks, and they don't exist anymore. And I was just randomly came up to the decision that well, I should start making videos about GG because there's a hole that needs filled, and that's how I got started with Recap.
Okay, and with everything that's been going on now, especially with the way Gamergate has grown, has changed, and there's been a lot of massive change, but there's also been a lot of volatileness when it came to the movement. And QQ is just a moniker. We of course had to confirm that we were talking to the person who's in charge of these YouTube videos, who's in charge of the QQ Twitter account. Is there a reason for your anonymity? Is it because you're trying to keep your personal life separate from Gamergate or anything of that nature?
Yeah, it's a variety of things. First of all, I'm very paranoid. So just in general, I'm like one of those privacy security nut computer type people. I'm using a VPN right now to try and get on Hangouts, which is always a interesting endeavor because Google doesn't like it when you log in from other countries and things like that. I have anonymity because it's partially cultural. I like the idea that I can change identities at will. I can have a flexible identity. I can have a pseudonym if I want to. But it's also for security concerns because I honestly don't want to be doxxed or anything like that. I don't want someone tracking me down or calling my job or anything like that because we've had plenty of that happen all over the place. That's not the type of thing that I want to have happen to me. And finally, there is a partial cultural element to it as well because I'm used to operating under a pseudonym online or full anonymity, like on 8chan, where you are actually strongly discouraged from using any pseudonym at all. Your ideas stand on their own merit. I like the idea of having my ideas stand on their own merit. I try to avoid forming a cult of personality with limited success lately, as you might have noticed. It's just a threefold thing: security, privacy, cultural identity.
Okay, and because you've already been making strides when it came to Recap. This week, your name has also been pushed in a different level, especially when it came to the Ralph retort and Game Diviner talking about the end of Gamergate and this massive plot on trying to say what the ending of Gamergate is. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I had a lot of trouble discussing this yesterday because Game Diviner had not gone public with it yet, and I was very much trying to protect his privacy. I didn't want to throw him under the bus. I didn't want to talk about private conversations that we'd had with each other because those were done under the expectation of privacy. So I was trying to talk about purely my role, which was a very difficult conversation to have. I was also trying to protect my own anonymity about the origin of that paste bin that is circulating. And I obviously failed at that. So everyone knows that I wrote it.
Okay, so you can't confirm you wrote it.
Yeah. I was the author.
Okay. And why were you trying to, all right, so you were trying to keep this all private because this was something you and Paolo were talking about privately, and it was all just, once he came forward with it, you would talk about it.
Yeah, I can somewhat summarize the course of events because Paolo himself has summarized them. So basically, he reached out to me with the idea of giving GG a farewell op. I actually had strong dissenting opinions about that. I had basically my view was I can outline it here. First of all, I didn't think that such an op would be a success because generally any op that's proposed these days has very low participation. That doesn't mean it doesn't have a lot of people doing it. Just as a percentage of the whole, not many people participate. That's not a bad thing. I mean, email campaigns, corporations inflate emails by a lot because they expect that a consumer has to be really pissed off before they'll send an email. So it still works even if a small percentage is involved. However, when it comes to things like coordinating the end of something, you're going to have, if you have low participation, you're just going to fail. I was also worried about the fact that everyone had a different definition of what the utility of the hashtag was to them. I was concerned that trying to convince everyone that the utility of the hashtag had come to an end would be a futile endeavor. I had concerns about ongoing digs. I didn't want to abandon people who were currently digging because they might not want the hashtag to end. They might want to publish their digs under it when they're done. And they would be disappointed if they came out of their digging group and tried to use the hashtag and were shamed for it. I was also concerned because of things like Polygon and some of the recent possible conflicts of interest that have been found on Polygon. When they were contacted, they still haven't replied yet. I'm still waiting on that. I mean, the editor-in-chief might have to review it. I don't know what their procedures are. That might take a while. But if they don't answer that, then I'm concerned about keeping the heat on publications like Polygon that have instituted ethics policies. They're actually pretty thorough ethics policy on Polygon, but they need to enforce it if they want to have the respective gamers. And my final concern was that I interact with a lot of different communities. I tend to not view GG as a whole as being a community. There are lots of communities. There's Kotaku in Action. There's 8chan or Infinite Chan. There's multiple communities on Infinite Chan. There's V. There's HQ. There's Revolt. There's the Burgers and Fries IRC. There's other IRC rooms. There's different forums on the internet like Space Battles that have their own community. There's the section on the Escapist. Each one of these communities has a very different community attitude, and some of them really do not like the idea of being bossed around like that. And that was one of my major concerns, is that if we try and do things from a top-down approach, it's not going to work. I even said it's going to create King of Pole levels of spaghetti. That's somewhat of an in reference, but it's going to be a disaster if it doesn't work out. So I made that paste bin somewhat as I didn't think anyone would ever accept it. It was a bit of a troll. If you read the title of the paste bin is A Guide to Ending Gamergate, which is a parody of the title of a Gama Sutra blog called A Guide to Ending Gamers. So, and then I tagged it Gamergate Pros Confidential because I thought like that would be like an instant flag that, oh, this is a joke. The entire thread is the paste bin is basically based off of a Reddit thread that I had made a while back, where the subject of the thread was basically criticize Gamergate, tell us what's wrong with it. So I took that, I rewrote parts of it. I added in a lot of things that I thought would not go over with e-celebrities. Like the idea that e-celebrities are useless. I basically put a section in there that says e-celebrities only deserve credit for the exact works that they've published and nothing else in GG. I put in a section about how all the cliques need to be dissolved and broken apart. It's humorous. I didn't think anyone would take it seriously, and yet it was taken seriously. And it was going to be shared around. I was very interested to see what the impact of that would be. And sure enough, someone decided that when they got a hold of it, that they would publish it. And that's what ended up happening. And it was published as again, the authorship was unclear. They said it was me, and that I think the first push was that I came up with the idea of ending the hashtag, and that this was my manifesto that was going to be pushed everywhere. That's not correct. I was approached by a game diviner first, and then I made that paste bin as a counter to it, as a response. And it's just been crazy because all these articles and publications and streams that are coming out aren't agreeing with each other at all. They're all saying completely different things. And of big concern to me is that they are taking things that Game Diviner said and things that I said, and they're just throwing them in a blender together. And yeah.
So there is confusion because the game. You're telling me that the paste bin itself was a parody. Itself was satire. It was a joke, but
it was
what
based off of
is
things that I believe, but it was my personal uh, how I conduct myself personally within GG. I don't join cliques if I think that there may be like different professionals competing with each other. That's a personal decision.
okay.
And in fact, if you read it, there's a direct contradiction within the post itself, because I basically say within it that everyone's an individual, everyone should act as an individual, and that individuality is very important, and that this is a guide to behaving as an individual. And then it's being published as if it's a guide for how to wrest control of the hashtag from the top down. Those two concepts don't work together.
Right. No, okay, yeah, I can see that. What disclaimer would you give to people who are taking this seriously? Because there are a lot of people who are looking at this as fact, unfortunately, and it, of course, is unfortunately doing damage. What disclaimer would you say to people who are looking at this and taking it too seriously?
I would ask them why they are not asking primary sources, why they're trusting secondary sources of who might have their own agenda to push. I've been on Twitter all day, and I've seen tons and tons of people talking about me, and very few people talking to me. So that is always an interesting concept, right? Because I'm right here. I have a Twitter account. I'm just one @ away from asking whatever question you want. And I'm getting very few of those, and no requests for streams, even though I'm seeing streams that are discussing the things that I'm saying. I'm not being invited on them. So I find it very interesting. It's like that this thing is being used instead of the attempts to find the truth.
Okay. On that notion, how would you feel about we open for questions on this stream? Like people can ask you whatever they want, and I'll vet the questions and I'll ask you. How would you feel if we did that later on?
Sure. I would. Here's the odd thing, though, is I wouldn't anticipate many, because again, people are more about talking about this than talking to me, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because, like I said, I tried to write that anonymously. I like it when people discuss my ideas on their own merits, even if they are somewhat humorous ideas. Everything in that document is just what I think taken to the absolute absurd extreme. Like, yeah, I don't think that people should be in a clique together if they're professionals in the same industry and competing with each other. Take that to the extreme. I don't think cliques should exist at all. That's what's in the document. So,
okay.
Yeah, if anyone wants to ask me about it, they can pop on.
Okay, so we won't have him pop on the stream. We can have him. We'll have him ask in the chat.
Sure.
So on the live chat on YouTube, if you have any questions you want to ask to QQ, you can ask right here on the chat. You can also ask on Twitter using the hashtag AskGJN. That's hashtag AskGJN. I'll be posting a link to it very shortly on Twitter. And any questions you have, please feel free to ask myself and QQ, especially about this topic. Going to what initially started this was because the Game Diviner had talked about it online, privately, some people, but he also did express interest in this beforehand. After Airplay, this was something that he wanted to. He felt that Gamergate had a victory, which was that we exposed corruption in games journalism. We there's this going down, and there has been, of course, the concern that people are hitting the Gamergate hashtag, the Gamergate movement, as this evil ideology. A horrible example is the person who shot the two journalists, and they tried to attribute to Gamergate, and that was trolls. It wasn't necessarily the people on the anti-side. If there are sides, and that's still debatable on their sides or not. Do you feel Game Diviner is right that we should just simply say we won and that's it in the story, or do you think that there's another way we can say that we are victorious in some way, shape, or form in this movement?
So that's another thing that is bothering me, is there's a lot of people putting words in my mouth. You can go back and watch the Airplay stream that I had with Game Diviner immediately following Airplay. He brings up the idea that here's another thing, right? This whole idea of being plotted in secret the whole time, it was discussed publicly. It just didn't get traction, and that's when I think that this whole idea of reaching out to people in DMs was formed. I can't speak for Game Definer. You'd have to ask him yourself if that was his motivation behind it. In that stream, when he brings that up, I bring up my opinion about it, which is very negative. My opinion was that I don't think that we're anywhere close to winning. And at the time, I was so when I do my recaps, I have to look into all the conflicts of interest that have been found recently. One of the things that I often see people say is that due to the institution of new ethics policies, that we are nearing or at a victory point. The issue is that conflicts of interest have continued to be found on publications that do not have ethics policies yet, and some of the larger gaming sites still do not have ethics policies. And when a conflict of interest is found on a gaming site with an ethics policy, very rarely is any action taken. So I think that there's still work to do on the ethics front. I know that I'm not necessarily one who only constrains it to the ethics front. I'm very interested in preventing censorship. That's what drew me into this in the first place, is I saw censorship on private platforms. I don't see much progress on that front either. All the private platforms that were censored during the initial blitz, if another controversy were to be discovered in the gaming industry that involved certain industry favorites, I would bet we would see the same type of censorship again. So I don't think we're near victory. And that is why a lot of people are calling my post a post of defeat. It's because of the conflicting collision of the concept of ending the hashtag, which is not something I personally believe in, with the concept of we're not winning. It makes it look like it's a surrender post.
Okay. So how long? What would you consider the ideal victory in the long run? Because we have seen people implementing ethics policies. We are seeing bloggers who are starting their own video game blogs in some way, shape, or form, and conducting themselves as journalists. You're recusing yourself. You make it very clear if there is any possible conflict. You've been conducting yourself as a journalist, even though you call yourself a blogger. What would you consider a key victory in the long run that would completely end this? What do you think would be the end?
A victory condition? So I'm a pessimist with regards to this. I think that the price of a healthy video game industry is constant vigilance. I don't think any of the problems that Gamergate is dealing with are new at all. I think that actually, if you were to go back a few decades, or if you go into any other type of press, not a few decades, like a decade. If you were to go back a decade, or you'd go into any other kind of enthusiast press, there are problems that are worse than what we're looking at now. And that means that if you want to keep the industry to be a service to the consumer, both in the side of journalism and in the side of industry ethics with regards to publishers and things like that. It's not journalistic ethics in that case, but publishers do engage in anti-consumer practices, not necessarily unethical practices, but anti-consumer practices, and sometimes they do engage in practices that are unethical. I think we need to always remain watchful for that, because there's never going to be a state of the world in general where, if it is lucrative to be unethical, that will not be the course of action that's taken.
Okay. On that notion, when we see where things have been going right, there have been sides drawn, and a lot of people are saying that there shouldn't have been sides. And we on this network, we've identified Gamergate as a hashtag movement that encompasses a series of controversies. And I consider myself to be on the pro side. If there was a side, I consider myself on the pro side, and I believe in the argument for ethics in gaming journalism. As a journalist, that's something that I believe in wholeheartedly. Do you consider yourself pro?
So I use very complicated definitions of GG, because I generally consider it to be a series of events, and only a series of events. And I don't consider myself to be a part of any overarching community or a part of any. I don't adopt Gamergate as an identity. I try to avoid things like that. This is a personal strategy again. I don't try and enforce my behavior on everyone else. At least not anymore. We all have our weaknesses, our weak moments on Twitter now and again. So to me, I generally describe myself as a participant in the consumer revolt or a consumer who is concerned about the state of the gaming industry.
Okay, and I'm sorry.
Yes, and so yes, that would put me on the side of pro, because the consumer revolt is one of the series of events that makes up Gamergate, the emergent protest that formed a consumer revolt.
And because there's a lot of people who are still saying that this is a movement that is specifically harassing people, that's specifically attacking a group, which Gamergate has been attacked in a whole as well, both pro sides and anti sides in different capacities. But is there any argument you feel you agree with that's on the anti side that has been going on, or do you feel that that should be its own separate hashtag altogether? Because a lot of people are saying that there should have been separate hashtags with this as a whole. If we go with the idea that there is communities involved with this, if we go back with the idea that there are sides drawn here.
So I tend to consider, and this is a controversial thing, I think that the anti-GG side is a part of GG. And by that, I mean they are an integral part of the series of events that makes up GG. You cannot tell the history of GG without bringing up Brianna Wu and things like that. They're a part of the series of events. As such, I don't really see a need. I mean, personally, I think that it would be nice if there were more communication lines open, but I don't think we currently have that. I think that we have an issue. It's not an issue on the GG side, but an issue where those who wish to stop the consumer revolt are not open to dialogue.
Okay, so how long do you think this revolt's going to happen? Because it's already been a year. And it's interesting because we look at other movements like Occupy Wall Street. A lot of people say Occupy Wall Street lasted a year, and that's debatable at best. We look at things like Chainology, and they had one massive protest. They continued talking, and it kind of just ended. But when we look at something like Gamergate, which has been leaderless, which has been just a hashtag movement that encompasses a lot of different controversies, one of them specifically ethics in gaming journalism. How long do you think this is going to keep going? We're already past a year. We've been seeing change. Do you think this would go on another year, a couple of months, a couple of weeks?
I think that there is one thing that separates GG from those other things that were described. Chainology, for example, 4chan at the time did not have like a section that was entirely dedicated to discussing Scientology. Like they didn't have a Scientology section that had existed for years, that was going to exist for years, and they just had an offshoot of a little series of events that was Chainology. Occupy Wall Street, likewise, it really was a thing in and of itself. However, when it comes to gaming, gamers have this thing where we are, this is stereotyping, of course, but we are, in general, very picky. And you can see this on communities like V. V has never not discussed industry issues and never not been disgruntled with the state of the industry. That's been an ongoing theme for ages on V. Or you can go to like any gaming community, the Steam forums. I mean, Steam forums are another place where you see a lot of people who are passionate about gaming, who want to discuss the games, want to talk about the problems in the industry and things like that. There's all these different gaming communities that exist that will continue to talk about industry issues and even issues in gaming journalism forever, and have talked about it for almost as long as they've existed. I think that as the hashtag fades, we're not going to see much of a difference over time. Again, I'm waiting for someone in the chat to say, well, you're trying to end the hashtag. No, if the hashtag fades naturally, that's just something that's going to inevitably happen after a while. The thing that I think would be destructive is if the hashtag was tried to be stopped from a top down. Some pseudo leaders would try to stop it.
And this goes back to speaking of pseudo leaders, because we never really had leaders when it came to Gamergate as a whole. We had people who were just taking sides. Why do you think no leaders ever came forward with something like this? Why do you think no one came forward and said, I'm in charge, let's do this, let's do that? Why do you think that didn't happen?
So there's this guy on Twitter called Grimmichu. He's James Desborough. He made a video on the concept of emergent protest, where I like his video very much. I don't necessarily agree with all of it. I've chatted with him on Twitter, by the way, a few times. Complimented on his videos because I think they're very good. I think that the reason why we don't have leaders is because GG does resemble the model of a somewhat anarchistic emergent protest. And of course, if you're somewhat anarchistic, having a leader is going to be the antithesis of that. You're never going to be able to have one. It's going to be chaotic if you try to create leaders, because having a hierarchy, that's what killed Occupy Wall Street, for example, is when they started adding hierarchies that really didn't make much sense from the perspective of the preservation of Occupy. So I think that a lot of the consumers participating in the revolt look at Occupy, see what happened once hierarchies started to be instituted, and decide that they want absolutely none of that, and that they will have no hierarchy, and that they will have no leaders, and that even the people that they sent to Airplay were only spokespeople, temporary spokespeople, not leaders. I think that distinction is a strategic one, and I think it's a very good strategic one, because all the classic sociological tricks, all the classic tactics, things like if you read Rules for Radicals and you're just trying to apply it by the book, those don't work if there's no hierarchy to apply it to. So I think it's a very sound tactical decision.
Okay. Speaking of Airplay, what was your thoughts on Airplay? Because you did have the live stream. I did listen to it later on. Let's TLDR that. Your thoughts on Airplay, and since Game Journals Network is playing Airplay 2, what would you like to see differently compared to the last Airplay?
So, I expressed my concerns in my recap mostly. Airplay, the issue that I see that goes on a lot within GG in general is there is a reluctance to talk about anything but a concrete conflict of interest. Concrete conflicts of interest are easy to prove, right? It's very easy to say, this person wrote about this person, they lived together, they paid each other money, whatever. I mean, there's a chain of proof there that you can just establish. I think that one of the things that the consumers participating in the revolt are most concerned with is when they woke up one day, started reading their favorite gaming website, and realized that the things that it was saying to them didn't match their experiences at all. In other words, it was saying things that just plain old weren't true. That's much more subjective, because what if it's an opinion piece from a different political lens? What if it's something like that? I mean, it's subjective, but it can definitely become an ethical issue. And I think Koretsky gave an example of this himself when the coverage post Airplay of the bomb threat covered just the bomb threat and didn't really cover Airplay. And he implied that might not be ethical, because they are specifically omitting, it's a live emission. They're omitting some details specifically because, or possibly I should say, because it doesn't match a narrative that they're pushing. And I think that kind of ethical issue, the kind where a specific narrative is being pushed, instead of seeking truth and reporting it, the truth is distorted, in order to match a narrative that is desired to be pushed. That is what people care about more. The overarching narrative to do with GG, the tens of thousands of game drops that have happened by now, that has all served to paint GG in the horrible light that it's painted today. I'm not so concerned with the PR, but I am concerned with the fact that this was able to be accomplished, that this was something that was possible to do, to turn it into such a pejorative label. And I think that is the largest ethical issue that is the most difficult to address because of its subjectivity, is the issue of pushing the grand narrative that the gaming industry is a horrible place for certain types of people to exist within, and that part of that is because there's this horrible misogynist group called Gamergate. I think that the spinning of that narrative in and of itself is possibly an ethics issue, and that's the one that people got really passionate about. So I would be very interested to see if it would be possible to cover that in a way that is not subjective, in a way that is more demonstrably unethical. It's going to be very hard.
Okay. Well, on that note, what would be your ideal video gaming journalism service? Whether it be website, series, TV show, magazine, what would be your ideal go-to video gaming journalism site?
So I am generally a fan of the model of YouTube Let's Plays, but I don't think that they are the be-all end-all. Generally what I'll do is I will combine a Let's Play with a written review, because then I can see the game, a portion of the game being played, and then I can get the whole picture in written text. This can even include user reviews. I've purchased many games simply by reading the user reviews on Steam and seeing what percentage of them are positive and what percentage of them are negative. I think that user curation services like that are useful as well. So I view a role for every type of gaming journalism, gaming blogging. I don't think that I use all of them. So they all have their uses. They all have their purposes.
Now, this is also, a big deal because, a lot of people have been wondering what's the proper way of reviewing a video game, because there's been a debate on that for years. I'm in the personal standpoint where the journalist and the reviewer should be two separate people. They should never be the same people. There can be an air of bias there. Now, we look at a situation like Metal Gear Solid 5. Now, I'm a big fan of the Metal Gear franchise. I would never review it, though, because I'm a journalist, and that would cause a level of bias. But then we look at a situation where Metal Gear Solid 5, where they had all these journalists come in and privately play the game, and that's been this level of controversy. You briefly talked about it. Is that? Do you think that's a platform that needs to be fixed, that needs to be changed, or should be thrown out altogether?
I understand why they do that. Their concern is that someone will take a review copy of the game, put it on eBay, and it'll leak out. And so in order to prevent that, they have a review event. That, to my understanding, is the reason that they're doing that, is to prevent spoilers and things like that from leaking out in that form. So there are multiple levels of concern with regards to that. Does it serve the consumer interest is a large question. And that's one that's mostly utilitarian in nature, I'd say, right? Because does it serve the consumer interest? Well, the game isn't leaking out early, so that in and of itself is in the consumer interest, right? But in exchange, they're getting a lower quality review. These people playing the game don't have time to complete the entire story unless they take shortcuts. So they're getting a lower quality coverage of the product. And then you get into things like having Kojima wandering around shaking people's hands. And that's when it kind of crosses the boundary into being just consumer unfriendly, into possibly being something that can influence the journalist's bias. Things like that, things like perks, anything like that. That is when it starts to become not just a issue of consumer advocacy, but an issue of ethics.
Okay. We actually have one question that was on the chat that I will ask. which unfortunately is the only question we've had so far that I've noticed. Q, if you were never involved in Gamergate, what would you be doing right now? Well, let's say Gamergate wasn't happening.
Right now, I would be playing City Skylines.
On that same notion, after Gamergate, let's say this ends, what are you going to do afterwards? Would your show recap continue in some way, shape, or form? Would you change the format of it? And what would you be doing after?
So what I would imagine is that I would have recaps less frequently, because I'm assuming that by the time that it's ended that there's less problems to cover in the industry. Fingers crossed. So I would do those less regularly. I would continue to make appearances on things like gaming podcasts because I have fun doing that. Maybe start my own if I could get any clout. And other than that, just go back to playing video games.
Okay, and that's the deal a lot of people want to do now, is just go back to play video games. But we still have a job to do. We're still talking about it, and that's what we can do at the moment. QQ, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, having this interview. When's the next recap coming out? Are you only doing it twice a month now? Is that the format you're going to keep with, or are you changing that any differently? When's next recap?
I'm going to try to stick to twice a month. I might have a very large delay or just one this month because I'm dealing with a lot of stuff right now. It means like all this controversy that's going on means that I have to jump on streams more often and I have to communicate with people more often and things like that. It's not very conducive to me sitting down, doing some research, writing up a script, and recording myself. That doesn't go very well with frequent distractions on things like Twitter or on streams or things like that. So this next one's going to be a little bit delayed.
Would you be talking about everything that's been going on, especially on your end, or?
I generally try to avoid drama, but I might have to cover it. Here's the thing, though, is we've reached the point where absolutely anything I say doesn't matter anymore. Basically, everyone's already made up their mind. So I don't know if me covering it anymore will be productive. If there's more that people want to hear, I'll gladly talk about it. And again, Game Diviner will you can ask him to try and keep me honest. I mean, you could make up a conspiracy that we're colluding or something like that, but it's up to you if you want to believe what I'm saying or not. So I don't know if I'm going to cover it. I might try and avoid it just because, again, I'd just be repeating myself over and over again, saying the same things, and then everyone else is just going to say whether they believe it or not, and that's not really facilitating a dialogue. I would prefer, instead of just dictating to people from my channel, that they'd have a discussion with me. So if you would like me to cover this more, hop on a stream with me sometime. I'll gladly talk about it.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a fair offer. I wouldn't mind doing that. And I will ask Game Diviner that question. I will be interviewing him tomorrow at noon. I just got confirmation on that. Tomorrow there will be an interview with him, and I'll ask him that personally.
All right.
All right. Well, QQ, thank you for coming on for this interview. I'm Aaron Pabon with Game Journalism Network. Again, tomorrow we'll be interviewing Paul Munez, a.k.a. Game Diviner, here at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time on this YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you.